How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chafei, I think. Yes, Daf Chafei, Daf 25 of Masechta Gittin. Friends, friends, what can I tell you about Daf Chafei? Daf Chafei is kind of cool. I mean, we're continuing on this Mishnah of if he wrote the get for one person, but it was not, but the same name, that kind of stuff. And then we get into the sugya of Breira that we've seen before. And then that'll take us to the next Mishnah that we'll learn tomorrow. So, just sit back, relax, and enjoy the babble. All right. Well, great. So we're going to start. We got a little bit of work to do on Chaf Daled Amud Beis. That's the truth, Lamaisa. But all right. What am I going to tell you? Adam la'amul yulad. Fellow is born to work. All right. So Chaf Daled Amud Beis, about 2/3 of the way into the Amud, by the two dots. Katana Kosav l'gayish sagdola lo yigayish bo zakatana. Ba-da-ba-ba. Who can tell me what that is? That's talking about a situation where you have a fellow, he has two wives, and they both have the same name. So if he writes a get for, we call them older and younger just as a way to distinguish between them. So if he writes a get for the older one, so then the get is for the older one. He can't use it for the younger one. Even though all the details are the same, names and everything are the same, but you can't. If you wrote it for the old one, you can't use it for the younger one. Fine. So it says the Gemara. Okay, so ketanahu d'lomotzi megarish bei. Fine. So if he writes the get for the older wife, so he can't use it to divorce the younger one instead. Hagadol lomotzi megarish bei. Ho ho. But the Gemara says, but the implication, of course, being he could use it for the older one. Right. Yes. Meaning, so if he has two wives with the same name, so if he writes a get for the older one, so he has to use it for the older one. Well, if he's going to use it, it's going to be for the older one, not for the younger one. But the thing is, that's not muvan me'elav. That's non-obvious. Because what the Gemara is about to point out is, what that's in effect saying is that when you have a document that, or let's say this, when you have people with the same name, then you can use a document with them. Let's go on for a second. So Amar Rav is also married. So it says, Rav, this says, Shnei Yosef ben Shimon, that here you go. Wow, why do I feel like my brain is cloudy? I don't know. But let me tell you, maybe I'm talking as if my brain is cloudy, but my brain isn't really very cloudy. So I hope that even though I'm talking like my brain is cloudy, I hope that the information is somehow being communicated. But what we see is that this sugya of a fellow who has two wives with the same names, and he writes a document and it's usable for one of them. So that's basically, we want to say, is the same as the situation where you have two people in a city with the same name. Okay, so where are we? So says Rava. So Amar Rava, this is basically the case. Those also merits. This is saying that Shnei Yosef ben Shimon Adon B'Yirachas, that if you have a city in which there are two people named Yosef ben Shimon, Motzin Shtarchov al Acherim, they can bring a Shtarchov al Acherim. What does that mean? It means that if you live in a city and there are two people named Yosef ben Shimon, now one of the Yosef ben Shimons lent $1,000 to Cham Yankel. So Cham Yankel then writes a document, and in the document it says, I, Cham Yankel, owe Yosef ben Shimon $1,000. So what we're saying is, Yosef ben Shimon can now go to Cham Yankel and say, okay, here's the document, you wrote it, says that you owe me $1,000, pay up. And Cham Yankel cannot say, no, I didn't borrow $1,000 from you. I borrowed $1,000 from the other Yosef ben Shimon. No, you can't say that, right? Because in effect, what we're saying here with the husband, with the Gittin, or that if you have a guy and he's got two wives with the same name, we're saying that he can write a get, and as long as if he's writing it for the older one, he just has to be able to use it he can use it for the older one. He can't use it for the younger one. And then now that they're getting divorced, she can then basically the older one now has a document which she can use to collect her ksuba, right? So now she's going to come the older one, who has the same name as the younger one, so it's basically a case of two Yosef ben Shimons, and she's now got a document, she's got this divorce document, and she's going to use it to collect her ksuba. I assume that's the point, that she can now use it to collect her ksuba. But basically, you have two people with the same name, one of whom is in control of a document, right, is in possession of a document, and we're saying that it's effective. So the Gemara wants to say, or who is it, Rava wants to say that from the fact that the get is effective for the older one, even though the younger one has the same name, that seems to be indicating that in the situation of two Yosef ben Shimons, one of them can pull out a document that says that Cham Yankel owes him money, and Cham Yankel would have to pay him, and Cham Yankel cannot say, no, I borrowed money from the other Yosef ben Shimon. Okay, so again, so on my Rav, it says, Rav is also married, this says, this indicates Shnei Yosef ben Shimon adorin bir achas, that when you have two people named Yosef ben Shimon who live in the same city, motziin shtarchov alachem, they can whip out a document, a loan document, and make a claim against the right. So one of the Yosef ben Shimons can whip out a loan document and make a claim that he's owed money, and the other fellow, Cham Yankel, cannot say, no, I borrowed money from the other Yosef ben Shimon. Oh, my nose is really itchy. Why? Who could tell me? Why is my nose itchy? Alright, wait, but seriously, why? Come on. I have to record Bab on time. I can't just rub my nose the whole time. Alright, let's go weiter. Fine. Omle Abai. Abai says to Rav Elamiato, Reisha, but then Abai says, 1 second, but if you're going to be so miduyak, well then, what about the previous case in the Mishnah where you have a guy who writes a get for his wife and he changes his mind, and then some other guy is walking by and he says, wait, those are my exact details. The name of your wife is the name of my wife. You and I have the same name. We're living in the same place. Can I just use your get and I'll give it to my wife? So now you have a situation where the second guy's wife now has a document, and she's going to come to collect with this document, and there are two people. This basically, right, so let's say both of the guys' names are Yosef ben Shimon. So basically she's in possession of a document, and there are two Yosef ben Shimons, and she's now going to collect from her husband Yosef ben Shimon based on this document, which seems to be indicating that, back with Yosef ben Shimon and Cham Yankel, if Cham Yankel has a document that, if Cham Yankel lent $1,000 to Yosef ben Shimon, and Yosef ben Shimon wrote Cham Yankel a document saying that he owes Cham Yankel $1,000, Cham Yankel can now go back to Yosef ben Shimon and say, okay, pay up. And Yosef ben Shimon cannot say, oh no, you lent the other Yosef ben Shimon $1,000. So again, some of the Abai says, Elamiata, so if that's the case, Reisha de Katani, in the previous case in the Mishnah, that it says, Shmi Kishimcha, right, that Yosef ben Shimon writes a get to his wife, he changes his mind, and then the other Yosef ben Shimon walks by and says, oh wow, we have the same name, our wives have the same name. Can I use your get? And I'll give it to my wife, and then she'll be able to, claim the ksuba from me. Posel ligarish bo. So sheni hu dilo motzi migarish bo. So we're just saying that the second Yosef ben Shimon can't use it for his wife, right? We said that if the first Yosef ben Shimon writes a get for his wife and then he changes his mind, so the second Yosef ben Shimon can't use that get for his own wife. But okay, fine. So the second Yosef ben Shimon can't. But Harishan Matzi Megarish Bey, but the first Yosef ben Shimon would be able to use it for his wife, even though there's another Yosef ben Shimon in the city. So V'aminon, but don't we say, now this is Abai's Kasha and Rava, but don't we say, V'lo acher yachol hotzi alien shtarchov? But the halacha is that in this case, when in effect, so we're saying that if the first Yosef ben Shimon is using this get to divorce his wife, and then she's going to collect based on this document, but that's not true, right? We say that the halacha is that in the situation of two Yosef ben Shimon's, Cham Yankel cannot take out a document saying that Yosef ben Shimon owes him money, because Yosef ben Shimon could say it's the other Yosef ben Shimon who owes him money. Cham Yankel cannot take out that document. And therefore, in the case of the Gittin, the first Yosef ben Shimon's wife would be unable to take out that document to collect with it. So Abai is so friends, with the whole Yosef ben Shimon thing and Cham Yankel, basically the point is that when it comes to Yosef ben Shimon collecting from Cham Yankel, it's a machlokas. But right, and we're saying that, and we want to say that from the fact that when Yosef ben Shimon has two wives that have the same, or basically when somebody has two wives with the same name, if we're saying that he could divorce the older one, that implies that, and then she's going to use that document to collect her ksubah. So that implies that when you have two people with the same name, right, in this case the two wives, they can collect from somebody else even though they have the same name. So we want to say, okay, so Rava says that indicates that in our machlokes of when you have two Yosef ben Shimon's, can they collect from Cham Yankel? It would sound like yes. Just like the two wives, the older one would be able to collect from the husband. So here also, when you have two Yosef ben Shimon's, one of them would be able to collect from Cham Yankel. However, there's a machlokus with regard to the two Yosef ben Shimon's collecting from Cham Yankel. But when it's fakert, when it's Cham Yankel collecting from the two Yosef ben Shimon's, everyone says that no way, no how. That doesn't work. So now, that does not work. So now Abaye asks Rave, if you're going to say that when you have the guy with the two wives and he's allowed to divorce the older one, so that implies that when you have two Yosef ben Shimon's, they can collect from Cham Yankel. So says Abaye, then you would also have to say that the opposite is true as well. That in the previous case, when we're saying that there are two Yosef ben Shimon's and the first Yosef ben Shimon can divorce his wife with the get that he writes for her, that implies that she would be able to collect her ksuba from her husband, even though there are two Yosef ben Shimon's. There are two people named Yosef ben Shimon's. That would imply that Cham Yankel would be able to collect from Yosef ben Shimon, even though there's another one, but that's not true. Everyone agrees that Cham Yankel would not be able to collect from Yosef ben Shimon, because he could say, no, you borrowed money from you lent money to the other Yosef ben Shimon. So clearly Abaye says, you can't be making those diyukim. You can't be making those diyukim. Where am I? Right? The Cham Yankel cannot bring a shtarchov against Yosef ben Shimon when there's another one. So rather, how do you have to explain the situation when so how do you have to explain that when there are two Yosef ben Shimon's and the first one writes it for his wife, he's allowed to, that's okay. He's allowed to write it for his wife, and we don't say that that's a situation of Cham Yankel collecting from two Yosef ben Shimon's, right? Meaning, right, when you have two Yosef ben Shimon's and the first one writes a get for his wife, so we say that the second Yosef ben Shimon wouldn't be allowed to use that get for his wife, but the first Yosef ben Shimon can use it for his wife, and we don't say that it's a situation of, that if his wife was going to collect with this get, then it would be the equivalent of Cham Yankel collecting from Yosef ben Shimon, even though there's another one. So then how do we, so how do we explain the wife using the get, even though there is another Yosef ben Shimon? Well, because it's Eidei Mesira. Because there were witnesses who witnessed the first Yosef ben Shimon giving the get to his wife. So therefore, she can collect with it because there were witnesses who saw. Right? There's no question that it was the other Yosef ben Shimon. There were witnesses who saw the get being given by the first Yosef ben Shimon to his wife. So, where am I? I keep on losing my place because it's such an involved sugya. I have to take my hands off the place to wave them around. So also, Rava, in the Reisha, in the first case, where you have this guy who writes a get for his two wives with the same name, it's not a situation of two Yosef ben Shimon's collecting from Cham Yankel. It's just a situation of Eidei Mesira, that if he writes it for the older wife and he gives it to her, and you have two witnesses who observed him giving it to her, then there's really nothing to be concerned about, right? Nobody's gonna say that he gave it to the other wife or anything like that. Okay, fine. Now, where are we? Okay. I think that was probably the most. It took 15 minutes just to explain those few lines. But I think after this, I don't know, maybe it's a long daf, I don't know. But I think that was probably the most technical of it, I think. Amar Rav, says Rav, Kulon poslin bechehuna chutz min harishin. Okay, so says Rav that all of the cases in our Mishnah, right? We had the case of the people learning how to write, learning how to become sofers, so they're not even writing it for anybody's intention. We had Yosef ben Shimon writing it for his wife, and then he changed his mind not to get divorced. We have the situation of a guy who writes it for his two wives with the same names. We had a situation where he writes it, he has two wives with the same names, but he doesn't write it with any one of them in particular in mind. He just says, I'll figure it out later. Out of all those four cases, the last three of them, right? Amarav kulan poslin bikahuna chutz min harishin. The last 3 out of 4 of them would be posel bikahuna. What does that mean? It means that if, for example, Yosef ben Shimon writes a get for his wife, changes his mind, he doesn't want to get divorced. The other Yosef ben Shimon walks by and says, hey, we have the same name, our wives have the same name. Why don't we live in the same place, why don't I just use your get? So we said in the Mishnah that the second Yosef ben Shimon would not be allowed to use that get. But what if he did? What if he took the get and he gave it to his wife? So the Gemara, so Rav is saying that if Yosef ben Shimon is a Kohen, so then they wouldn't be able to remain married anymore. Even though it's not a kosher get, they can't remain. She would be considered a grusha in that case, and they would not be able to remain together. They would not be able to remain together. Okay. So it says Rav, so Amar Rav, I'm going to read that again. It says Rav, Kulan poslin bikahuna, all of those examples in our Mishnah would make the wife posel likahuna, meaning if he's a kohen, they cannot remain together anymore, even though it's not a kosher get. Chutz min harishin, with the exception being the first case where you have the scribes in training who are learning how to write a ksuba. In that case, since they're not writing it with any woman in mind, so that wouldn't even be posel min hakuna, it would be nothing. Ushmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Af rishin nami posel. Whereas Shmuel says that even in that case, even in that case, it would be posel from kehuna. Ve'oz the Shmuel the timing, that's consistent with Shmuel's approach to Amar that Shmuel says, Kol makom sheshanu chachamim get posel, that whenever the chachamim talk about a get posel, such as in the examples in our Mishnah, posel ufosel. It's pasul and it's also posel min hakuna. Any case, including the first case, all of them. Chalitza psula v'salta min ha'achin. As we learned about Masechta Yevamis, that if you have a chalitza psula, so not only does it not work for chalitza, so it doesn't work for chalitza, but at the same time, she would not be able to do yibum with any of the brothers anymore. B'mayrava amim b'shmei Rabbi Elazar. In Eretz Yisrael, they say in the name of Rabbi Elazar, small vilayla psulis ufoslos, that if you did chalitza with the left foot, even though it needs to be the right foot, but if she removed the shoe from the left foot, vilayla, or if it was done at night, psulis ufoslos, so then the chalitza is possible, and she would not be able to do yibum with any of the other brothers. Ka'in v'anpilya, but if it's a minor, right, who does chalitza, v'anpilya, or it was a cloth shoe and not a leather shoe, poslos ve'ein psulos ve'ein poslos. The chalitza is posel and it won't be posel from the brothers or anything, because it's not even any chalitza at all. We're finally getting on today's daf after 20 minutes. Wow. Okay. Zeiri Omar says Zeiri Kulan ein poslin chutz min ha'achrin. Says Zeiri that none of them would be posel from kuna except for the last one. Except for the last one, when he's got two wives with the same name, and he says, I'm writing a get and I'll figure out later who it's for. So in that case it would be posel, but in any of the other cases it would not be posel. V'chein Amar Rav Asi, and similarly says Rav Asi, Kulan ein poslin chutz min ha'achron, that out of all of them, only the last example, right, the one when he says we'll figure out later who it's for, only in that case would it be posel from the kuna. Reb Yochanan Amar says Reb Yochanan af achron nami eno posel, whereas Reb Yochanan says no, even the last one is not posel. Azda Reb Yochanan the time, and Reb Yochanan is consistent with his reasoning. The Amar Rav Asi Amar Reb Yochanan says Rav Asi Amar Reb Yochanan achon shecholku lekuches hein umachzirin zeloz yovel, that if you have brothers and the father passes away and they inherit the father and they divide up the estate, so at Yovel, everything reverts and they have to divide up once again, because we don't say Breyer, right? We don't say that Memela, whatever each brother got, was what was meant to be his all along. We don't say that, and we say that, it's divided up, but who knows, maybe Reuven, the brother, got what was really supposed to be Shimon's, maybe Shimon got was really what was supposed to be Reuven's, we don't know, so therefore everything reverts at Yovel. Okay, so we see that Rabbi Yochanan does not hold of Breira, right? Right? Of course, we know what Breira is, right? Breira is that can we Photoshop things, right? Can we say after the fact that whatever portion everybody got was what was really theirs all along, right? That whatever ends up happening reflects how it really was meant to be all along. Rabbi Yochanan does not hold of Breira, and therefore he says that that the inheritance reverts at Yovel. And here also, when it comes to, if he writes a get, he's got two wives with the same names, and he says, I'll figure out later who it's for, we don't say that when he ends up then giving it to the older one, for example, it was really hers all along. We don't say that. We don't say Breira, and therefore, that's why Rabbi Yochanan says over here, right, Af achron nami eno posel, that even in that case it's not posel, min hakuna, because we don't say Breira, it wasn't a good get whatsoever. Utzricha, and we need Rabbi Yochanan to teach us both cases. The case of a get, to say that when there are two wives with the same names, we don't say Breira, that he could just say, I'll figure out later who it's for, and then retroactively it would have been for that one all along. We don't say Breira there. And we also don't say Breira by the brothers who inherit their father's estate. We don't say what each son got was really what was rightfully theirs all along, and that nobody got what was really meant for the other one. Where am I? Utsricha, we need both of them. If we would only have the situation of Gittin, where Rabbi Yochanan does not say Breira, Rabbi Yochanan de Breira. So here by Gittin is where Rabbi Yochanan says Ein Breira, there's no Breira, Mishum Deba'inam, because we need Lo Lishma, because it has to be for her specifically. We can't say, after the fact that it was really meant for her. No, it has to be written at the time that you're writing it. It has to be written with the intention of the person that it's being written for. You can't do that later. Aval Hasom, but when it comes to the inheritance, maybe I'd say Mecher Huda Amrachman and Lihader B'Yovel, that it's only things that are sold, things that are bought and sold are things that revoit at Yovel. Aval Yerusha Matana, but inheritance and gifts, they don't revert at Yovel. V'Ashmo'inon Sode, and if you'd only have the situation of the field, the Lechumra, I would say that, okay, maybe Rabbi Yochanan says that there's no Breira there, because by saying Ein Breira, it's a Chumra. That means that everything reverts at Yovel, so it's more strict. Inami Ketrila, or you can argue that when it comes to the inheritance, it's simply going back to how it was initially, right? That initially it was all the property of the father, then they divided up, and now it goes back to how it was. So it's not about, did each person take ownership of the right thing. It goes back to how it was prior to how it was divided up. But over here I'll say, to be lenient, when it comes to the Gittin, to be lenient and say Ein Breira, and therefore it's not posel min hakahuna, and they can remain together, that's a leniency. So I might think that we wouldn't say Breira. So Kamash Malon, that Tzricha, therefore we need both cases. We need the case of Gittin to say that Rabbi Yochanan does not say Breira there, and also the case of the brothers to say Rabbi Yochanan does not hold of Breira there. So now we get into some Breira sugyas basically until the end of the daf. So Ba'amine, Rav Hushaya and Rav Yehuda. So Rav Hushaya asks a kasha from Rav Yehuda, Omer le'lavler, that if a fellow says to a scribe, so Rav Hoshaya asks of Yehuda that if a fellow says to a scribe, write me a get, and then right? So you have a guy, he's got 2 wives with the same name. So he says to a scribe, write me a get, and whichever one comes out of the house first, that's the one retroactively it will be for. Amar lei, right? So how can he do that? So Amar lei, so Rav Yehuda says, Tnisua, well, just look at our Mishnah. You also mikain Omar the lavler, that if a guy has 2 wives with the same name, and he says to the scribe, Sov le'ezo she'eretz agaresh, right? He says to the scribe, write me a get, and I'll choose whoever I want to, whichever wife I want to give it to. Pasul agarish, but it's not good. So I'm ein brayer. So we see that the Tana of our Mishnah says that there's no brayer. You can't, just choose later on which wife you want to give it to, and then Memela, that means that all along, it was really written for her all along. We don't say brayer, so therefore we can't say the same thing also with whoever walks out of the house first. It doesn't work like that. No brayer. Eisve, but then Rav Hoshaya asked Rav Yehuda Kasha, Ha'omer Livonov, that if you have a fellow who slaughters a korban pesach, and then he says to his kids, Harini shoichet es pesach al mishayala mikem liYerushalayim, that I'm slaughtering the korban pesach, and then whoever gets to Jerusalem first, I had him in mind. Right? Whoever gets to Jerusalem first, they can join me, they can partake in the korban pesach. We've seen this before. That whichever of the children gets to Jerusalem first, well, they will be able to take part in the korban pesach, and if he wants, he could dish out to the rest of the brothers. So what do we see? So we see clearly brayer, right? The father says, I'm slaughtering a korban pesach, and now whichever one of you kids gets to Jerusalem first, retroactively I had him in mind. So we see that there is brayer. So Rav Yehuda, why are you quoting from our Mishnah that there is no brayer? So Amalei, so Rav Yehuda says to Rav Hoshaya Bri, Hoshaya my son, Ma'inin Psachim Eitzel Gittin. How come you are comparing this sugya from the Korban Pesach to Gittin? Right? We're saying that by Gittin we don't say brayer, and you're bringing me a kasha from Korban Pesach. Let me tell you something, says Rav Yehuda. That case by Korban Pesach has nothing to do with brayer. That it was stated about it that Rabbi Yochanan says, how come he's making this competition between his kids, who's going to get to Jerusalem first? He's just trying to motivate the kids. Make it into a race, make it into a game, make it fun. Hey, whoever gets to Jerusalem first wins. But it's not brayer. It's not to say that whoever gets to Jerusalem first, retroactively at the time that I started the Korban Pesach, he's the one I had in mind. No, it's not brayer. No, he had all of them in mind. When he slaughtered the Korban Pesach, he had all of his kids in mind. And he was just trying to give a shtickle incentive. Hey, whoever gets there first, you're special. And we can also infer from the fact that it says that whoever gets to Jerusalem first, he merits his portion. He can divide it up with his brothers if he wants. This makes sense if you say that at the time that he slaughtered the Korban Pesach, they were all, together with him in the Korban Pesach. But if they weren't already included in the Korban Pesach when he slaughtered it, can they be counted in the Korban Pesach after it's already been slaughtered? We learn in the Mishnah, they can join in the Korban Pesach, and they can back out of the Korban Pesach until it is slaughtered. But once it's slaughtered, it's too late. And therefore, it doesn't make any sense to say that whoever gets to Jerusalem first is going to be included in the Korban Pesach that was already slaughtered. You can only add people to the Korban Pesach until it's slaughtered. Afterwards, you can't. And therefore, clearly then, the father had all of them in mind from the beginning, and he was just trying to make it into a competition so that the kids can have a good time. Tanya Nami and hopefully they'll all want to get to Jerusalem quickly. Tanya Nami we also learn in a brayso like this. Maise v'kadmu bonus lebanim. There was episode of Maise where the girls beat the boys and the girls got to Jerusalem first. And it turned out that the girls were more motivated, were more excited to get to Jerusalem than the boys, who were a bunch of nudniks. So what do we see? It doesn't say that the girls were included and the boys weren't. It says the girls were better and the boys were worse, but they were all included in the Korban Pesach milichatchila. Fine. Now, Omar Abaye. So 1 second. So by the situation of the Korban Pesach, it's not a situation of Brera. You had them in mind the whole time. So forget it. Now, Omar Abaye asks an interesting kasha. He takes a look at this discussion that we just had between Rav Oshaya and Rav Yehuda. That Rav Oshaya asked the situation of whichever wife comes out of the house first. Rav Yehuda answered with our Mishnah where he says, I'll decide later who I want it to be for. Rav Oshaya then countered with the situation of the kids running to Jerusalem to get there for the Korban Pesach. So Abaye says, Omar Abaye, I don't understand. Rav Oshaya asked Rav Yehuda about a situation where it's totally b'das acherim, when it's out of his control and it's dependent on other people, right? So when he says to the scribe, write me a get, and then whichever of my two wives that have the same name, whichever of them leave the house first, the get will be for them. So that's not up to him. It's not his choice. It's nothing he's doing. It's up to them. It's up to them. It's up to somebody else. Whichever of them happen to walk out first, then that'll be the one. And Rav Yehuda is answering from our Mishnah, which is a situation where he's the one who decides. Right? He's saying to the scribe, write me a get for my two wives, right? I have two wives with the same names, write me a get, and I'll decide later who I want it to be for, and retroactively it would be for them the whole time. So in this case, it's Toleh B'das Atzmo. He's the one in charge. He's the one making the decisions. V'hader Mosiv lei Toleh B'das Acherim. And then Rav Hoshaya responds with the situation of the Korban Pesach, which is also Toleh B'das Acherim. It's not up to the father who's going to get there first. It's up to the kids who's going to get there first. So what's going on over here? How come Rav Hoshaya is talking about Toleh B'das Acherim? Rav Yehuda is responding with Toleh B'das Atzmo. Rav Hoshaya is still responding with Toleh B'das Acherim. Talk about the same thing, everybody. Oh, my Rav. So Rav says, look, my kusha, what's the kasha? Dilma, perhaps. Man de isle breira. Look, if you hold breira, but maybe there is no such distinction between Toleh B'das Atzmo and Toleh B'das Acherim. Abaye, you're asking a question as if you're taking for granted that there's a distinction between Toleh B'das Atzmo and Toleh B'das Acherim. Maybe there isn't. Maybe the only distinction is whether or not you hold a breira. If you hold a breira, you always hold a breira, regardless of if it's Toleh B'das Atzmo or Toleh B'das Acherim. And if you don't hold a breira, you don't hold a breira, right? If you do hold a breira, then you hold it regardless. And if you don't hold a breira, you hold it regardless. But there's no it doesn't actually make a difference whether it's Toleh B'das Atzmo or Toleh B'das Acherim. So Amar Rava says, Rava, my kusha dilma, man de isle breira, if you hold a breira, loshna Toleh B'das Atzmo, loshna Toleh B'das Acherim. It doesn't matter whether it's a situation of Toleh B'das Atzmo or Toleh B'das Acherim. Isle breira, you hold a breira. Uman de leisle breira, and if you don't hold a breira, loshna Toleh B'das Atzmo, loshna Toleh B'das Acherim, leisle breira. It doesn't matter whether it's you're the one deciding later or somebody else is deciding later. Ein breira. Right, so Rava says to Abaye, maybe this distinction between Toleh B'das Atzmo and Toleh B'das Acherim isn't actually a real thing. Amle of Mishashia l'Rava. Then if Mishashia says to Rava, 1 second, there's no difference between Toleh B'das Atzmo and Toleh B'das Acherim. V'ha Reb Yehuda, the Toleh B'das Atzmo leisle breire, v'Toleh B'das Acherim isle breire, but breire parapa. Right, so Reb Mishashia asked Rava, he says, 1 second, but if we look at Reb Yehuda's opinion, Reb Yehuda does make a distinction between Toleh B'das Atzmo and Toleh B'das Acherim. When it comes to Toleh B'das Atzmo, Reb Yehuda does not hold of breira. When it comes to Toleh B'das Acherim, Reb Yehuda does hold of breira. Right, so again, for Reb Yehuda, the Toleh B'das Atzmo leisle breira, that when it's Toleh B'das Atzmo, when it's based on his decisions, he does not hold of breira. But Toleh B'das Acherim isle breira. But when it's Toleh B'das Acherim, when it's dependent on somebody else's decision, he does hold a breira. Tol b'das atzmo leis lebreira detanya. How do we know that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold a breira when it's tol b'das atzmo? We've seen this brisa before, I think a few times already. Let's see. We saw it in Sukkah. We saw it in Erevin. Yeah. A fellow who purchases wine from the kusim, and you have to assume that they did not separate anything. Trumas, maisris, nish, gunish, nothing. So Omer Shnei, and he's very, very thirsty. He's got to drink. And he can't separate Trumas and Maisis right now. He's on the road. So what do? He's got to drink. He can't separate Trumas and Maisis right now. So he says, look, Omer Shnei Lugan Shani Osid Lahafrish Arein Truma. Look, at a later point when I get home, I'm going to separate 2% of this, and that's going to be Truma. Asar Maiser Rishon, and 10, right, a tenth of it is going to be Maiser Rishon, Tisha Maiser Sheni. 9% of it is Meiser Sheni, right? Because of course, right, you take from 100%, you separate 2%, so you're left with 98%. From that, you separate 10%, so that's minus another 9.8%, which is what, like 89 point something. And then from that, you take 10%, which is essentially 9% of the original amount. Right? Does that make sense? What? Yes? 10 parts. Yeah, 2 parts Truma, 10 parts Meiser, and then, and then Be'etzim, right, it'll be another 9 parts, right, 8.9 or something, which is Be'etzim 9 parts, Meiser Sheni. I think the math makes sense. Umeichel, and then the Meiser Sheni, you basically transfer its value onto money. Okay, V'shosam Yad Divrei Meir, and then he can drink it immediately. That's Reb Meir's opinion. So basically, Reb Meir holds a breir, right? He's saying that Mimele, that which I'm drinking now, the fact that I'm drinking it now means that it's chulin, and then whatever he separates later was really meant to be Trumas and Maisus the whole time. So he's saying that at some later point, we can retroactively say that the parts that he's separating later at Maiser were really from initially were Maiser the whole Trumas and Maisus the whole time. The part that he's drinking right now, is the whole time was always chulin, and we can say breir, and that's Tola B'das Atzmo, right? He's the one calling the shots. He's the one separating, drinking and separating things. Reb Yehuda, Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon, Osin. Now, while Reb Meir says he can do that, Reb Yehuda, Reb Yossi, and Reb Shimon say that it is Osir. So we see that by Tola B'das Atzmo, Reb Yehuda is saying that Ein Breir. Tola B'das Acherim, and yet when it comes to Tola B'das Acherim, Isle Breir. Rabbi Yehuda does hold the breir that Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah. Ma hi be'osan hayomim. What is she during those days? Rabbi Yehuda Omer arehi ke'eshes ish l'chol v'reil. She's considered like an eshes ish. L'chimayis havigita, when he dies, it's a get. This is talking about a situation when a fellow says to his wife, "This is your get from right now. This is your get from right now. If I die from this particular illness that I have right now." So if he ends up dying from that particular illness, so if he ends up dying from something else, then it's not a get from right now. But if he ends up dying from that particular illness, so we go back and say breira, and say from the fact that he died from that particular illness, it means that already from the whole time, it was a get. So we see that breira, right, that this is Tola B'das Acherim, it's not up to him what he's going to die from, and we say breira, that from the fact that he ends up dying from that disease means that from the whole time it was already a get because he was going to die from that disease. So again, so the Tanan is we learned in Mishnah, so what is her status during that whole time when we don't yet know if he's going to die from that disease or not? And Rabbi Yehuda says, well, she's like an Eishes Ish for all intents and purposes, right? And she'll be able to eat truma and stuff like that if he's a kohen. And when he dies, if he ends up dying from that illness, well then, Mamela will say breira that he, from the point that she received the get initially, she was divorced because from the fact that he ended up dying from that disease meant that Mamela the whole time he was going to die from that disease. So we see that when it's Tola B'das Acherim, when it's outside of his control, Isle Breira, he holds a breira. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda, when it came to the wine, he didn't hold a breira. Tola B'das Atzmo, Ein Breira, Leis Le Breira. When it comes to Tola B'das Acherim, Isle Breira. Amalei of Mishashe Rava, and says of Mishashe to Rava, Harib Shimon, and also Rib Shimon, the Tola B'das Atzmo Leis Le Brere, that when it comes to Tola B'das Atzmo, he does not hold a Brere, but Tola B'das Acherim is Le Brere, and yet when it comes to Tola B'das Acherim, he does hold of Brere, just like Reb Yehuda. Tola B'das Atzmo Leis Le Brere Hadamorin. When it comes to Tola B'das Atzmo, Reb Shimon does not hold a Brere. Like we said, by the wine of the kuti, he says that you can't just drink it now and say that that's okay. And yet, when it comes to something that's outside of your control, he does hold a brera. The Tanya is within the Bryce. That if a fellow, right, there's three ways that a fellow could be mekadesh a fellow: with kesef, with money, with bishtar, with a document, or bibia, with bia. So if a fellow is being mekadesh a woman with bia, and he says, I'm being boel you, under the condition that my father is okay, it's okay with us getting married. Even though the father doesn't want, is not into it, he's still mekudeshes, they're still married. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Reb Shimon, in the name of Reb Shimon, if the father's into it, they're mekudeshes. If the father's not into it, they're not mekudeshes. Meaning, if the father's into it, it's tola b'das acherim, right? It's dependent on whatever his father says. If the father's into it, so then retroactively, it means that it was a good kiddushin the whole time. So he holds a brera by tola b'das acherim, but by tola b'das asmo, by the wine of the kuti, he doesn't say brera. Omar le, to which Rava now responds and he says, no, you got it all wrong. Bein l'Reb Yehuda, bein l'Reb Shimon, both according to both of them, lo shna tola b'das atzmo, v'lo shna tola b'das acherim. It doesn't make a difference if it's tola b'das atzmo or tola b'das acherim. It's lu brera. They do hold a brera. Well, if that's the case, then how do you explain the wine of the kusi where they say that he can't drink it? But awesome, the reason by the wine, as we've seen twice already before, the reason by the wine is not because of the issue isn't the brera. The brera is fine. That's fine. He can drink whatever he wants, and then after the fact, we'll say that what he drank was chulin, and what he separated his trumas and maisus was trumas and maisus. That's not the problem. But they said to Reb Meir, while Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, Reb Yossi, they're saying that if everything works out right, and the wine skin that it's in doesn't break and you lose all the wine, as long as you get home and you separate trumas and maisus, sure, then we'll say brera. But how do you know that the container that it's in is not going to break and you're going to lose all the wine and you're never going to have the opportunity to separate trumas and maisus, which then means that memeli you drink tevel. So they're saying to Reb Meir, we agree with you about brera, but what about the fact that the container that it's in might break and you'll lose everything, and then memeli you drink tevel? To which Reb Meir says, look, I'll believe it when I see it. Look, I'm not concerned that it's going to break. If it breaks, that's a terrible thing. But we'll come back to me if it actually breaks. I'm not concerned that it's actually going to break. And therefore, you could drink the thing. We'll say brera. I'm not concerned that it's actually going to break. Don't be so worried about every eventuality. All right. Friends, that was Daf Chav Hey of Masechta Gittin. There was an interesting sugya at the beginning of Daf Chav Hey, which was really towards the end of Chav Daled, about when you have two Yosef ben Shimons, you have two people with the same name. Can they extract money from Cham Yankel? Can Cham Yankel extract money from them? We said it's a machlokas about them extracting money from Cham Yankel, but everyone agrees Cham Yankel would not be able to extract money from them. Okay? And then we started leaning towards kind of the sugyas of brera, whether we say brera or not, and if there's a difference between Tola B'das Atzmo, Tola B'das Acherim. Rava seems to be saying no. Friends, that was Daf, what was that? Daf Chav Hey of Masechta Gittin. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.